It's summertime, and it's not just hot outside, but there are hot and interesting things happening in Phobies. So we're going to talk about the upcoming patch that's coming on June 25th. We have a whole lot of changes. We're presumably going to get a whole bunch of new Phobies. We're going to start out with the changes and then take a peek at, well, the sneak peek that we got from the team for the summer update. So let's get into it. Now, of course, I have to let everybody know before we dive into everything that I am part of the content affiliate program. That means that the Phobies team does, in fact, give me coffee for producing Phobies content, like what you're watching. But they also provide prizes for our weekly tournament series, Monster of the Week. We also have an async tournament running. That doesn't have prizes at the moment, but it is named A-Shriek. If you're interested in Phobies tournaments where everything's set to level 1, hit up the Random Thoughts Discord. The link for that is in the description of this video, of course, by the like and subscribe button. But without much further ado, let's get to it. Our first change is one that the community has been pleading for, to be honest, it's literally 2 years now. I'm pretty sure that the second that Attractor was released, everybody saw what it actually did and how it functioned, everyone was screaming for it. When we first saw the trailer way back when, for full disclosure, I think most people were justifiably concerned about Attractor and what the potential for this phobie was, but at the end of the day, we didn't know for sure. Then we got it in hand, and the complaints have been nonstop since. So it's interesting that it took until this point. However, as an overall preface, and especially here, the Phobies team has, in the past, of course, let us know that they are not simply balancing by win rates. There are other metrics, other numbers that come into play, other ways to evaluate phobies that drive whether a phobie is getting a justifiable change or not. And in this particular case, for a long time, Attractor apparently was just not performing well enough. As in, it was not showing to be impressive, it was not showing to be problematic, and as a result, it evaded the nerf hammer for a long time. Now, we are actually getting a change. You can see up above me at this point in time, at the time of the recording, we have not gotten the patch. Obviously, it is June 21st. This patch is coming on the 25th. That means that you're seeing the current version of Attractor, and that's why I wanted to have the side-by-side with the notes. Attractor's getting an ability cooldown increase from 1 to 2. So you're not going to be able to just swing games with Attractor constantly. Now, this is kind of a minor change compared to what many community members have, shrieked for, I'll say. My initial reaction is this is possibly good enough. Attractor is still problematic, but there are multiple facets for this, almost as many as Attractor has eyes, maybe more. But the reason that I say that it's multifaceted is this. It is absolutely problematic that Attractor's able to yoink your whole team. It's very difficult to try and outplay the Attractor player. And then by the time you sort of recover, which is not long after, maybe you haven't even recovered, bang, already they have another pull and they're taking your entire team apart. I think a lot of counter arguments to this will be, it doesn't matter. The first Attractor pull is what ends the game. And the follow-ups are just kind of icing, with the exception, of course, that, yeah, there are some games where the ability for the Magnetized to come up quickly enough would just, that's the end of it. Like, there are games that you will lose as the Attractor player that you would not have lost today, but you will tomorrow. Well, metaphorical tomorrow. The problem here is, aside from all of that, I think the bigger problem is that Attractor probably needed a health nerf. It feels just a little too difficult to get the Attractor. If you dive for an Attractor with, say, Ray Chargels, you actually can't one-shot it. Which, all right, Ray is a 5 key, Attractor is a 6 key. Mechs get extra health and blah, blah, blah. But even then, what are you going to do? Dive also with Klepto? So now your opponent retaliates, effectively got a free, air quotes, Attractor pull on Ray and Klepto, and then you can kill them. It's just, I don't know. This is clearly going to impact Attractor. I will say if the team is monitoring it And they didn't say this, as you can see from the notes over there. And maybe when we get the official patch, there will be more information, and I really pray that they do, because it's uncommon that we get feedback from the devs. We just see what they do most of the time. We don't get information surrounding it. So I would love to know if this is a change with the intent that we are likely to get a second change. Is the second change necessary? I don't know. I want to see how this plays out, and I think everybody should give it a chance. I think a lot of people are going to be very happy, and then even more people are going to be upset that it wasn't a further nerf. But this is rather dramatic. I am kind of in the camp of attractor's first pull ends the game. Effectively. Maybe not literally, but effectively. I want to see it in practice to see how it works, because we saw with the Akira nerf, the single turn was dramatic. Now, maybe they should have messed with the warm-up on here so that attractor can't immediately, not immediately, but very quickly pull. I'm not sure. I'm cautiously optimistic about this change. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. All right, here's the one that I know everybody was waiting for, Bad Sushi. This was actually mentioned last patch, I believe, last balance patch, and this is interesting. So, we were told in the last patch that Bad Sushi was potentially getting a rework. Now, rework is a very nebulous term, because to me, a rework is it is doing something completely different. However, you can have definitions of rework where it includes things like this change. And what is the change we removed? Well, the devs removed the ability cooldown. So now Fish Fight can be just slammed every turn. I guess it will still have the warm-up. I saw somebody asking in Discord immediately, why does it even have an ability? Why is it not just a regular attack or something like that? And Firkin comes into play, the warm-up, so you can't just do it out of the vault. I don't know how often that's going to come up, but all right, that's a scenario that is now avoided. I think Bad Sushi's still kind of bad. I honest to God was hoping for a rework that more akin to what I was describing initially of this is going to be a complete rework and Bad Sushi suddenly does something wildly different. I'm still of the opinion that Bad Sushi's in that position of, if this thing is good, the game is in an unhealthy state. Meaning that if Bad Sushi is a normally playable phobie, it's probably too powerful and it's actually oppressive. I disagree with chat that it's anything resembling a turret because it's not ranged. So yes, you can't approach it, and it does have an enormous amount of HP. Like, this is a lot of HP at a level 5. But I'm not super enthusiastic about it. Fish Fight, it's poison, so it's not great. It probably will slaughter most things early in the game because, I mean, look at this. At level 5, it's doing 1,300 and change between the attack and then the poison. Is your opponent going to bother muffining something? I mean, I just don't know. When do you want Bad Sushi that you wouldn't be happier having bow mangles? Like, what map are you doing this on? I guess some sort of Coliseum map where your opponent has to, like, come at it from multiple angles and you possibly connect with 2 different things, but it could have increased the movement from 1 to 2 instead of removing the ability cooldown. I mean, I think it needs a nerf in HP then. Never Forever? Honestly, Never Forever could be a reasonable map to use it on. You know, like, I don't know. I don't know that I want Bad Sushi to be good. I legitimately don't know that I want this phobia to be good. I think it's, no pun intended, going to be toxic if it is. This might be valuable on, like, I forgot about Never Forever, but like conveyor maps, maybe if you can get this thing into the fight. You know, actually, as I'm saying this out loud, I don't know how I forgot about Shove Shark and Fantome, which we'll talk about later, but maybe even then it's still kind of like for the same cost you could have Kaboom. You'd be way more likely to connect. You'll do significantly more damage. It'll be immediate damage, which is always better than poison. I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards Bad Sushi is still going to be bad. It will clearly be better. But I don't know that this is what Bad Sushi needed. Bad Sushi's issue was that it would frequently be unable to connect because it was a one-mover. It was a one-mover that had to be in melee range. Like, how many one-moving melee Phobies are playable is the bottom line. Like, yeah, it's AoE, but, like, who cares? I'm leaning towards Bad Sushi is still bad. I hope it is, because I really think it'll be problematic if it became good. That's the way I look at it. Next up, we got Blondie getting buffed. Somebody was saying Blondie got nerfed, and I'm like, usually I would consider a health increase to be a buff. So Blondie's getting a health increase from 2,500 to 2,800. That's a pretty significant jump. Now, I also saw somebody comment in Discord, why does Blondie deserve a buff now? When it was not a problem, like, it was okay pre-Shove Shark. It is getting way more play now than it did ever pre-Shove Shark and Fantome. Like, I think that's the reality of the situation. Probably most people, they unlock Blondie, they got it to a decent level, and they go, all right, I'm excited to try out my new Phobie, let's get it in there. And then they just go, this guy sucks. But Fantome and Shove Shark changed the entire shape of the game, the whole game, but especially for things like Blondie. So Blondie here now has two partners in crime that make it way more playable. So why does it get the buff now? That is kind of weird when you think about it, but maybe the devs finally got enough data because people have been trying it more. The other argument, and I posted this into Discord, was that maybe the devs just like the play pattern that Blondie has introduced. So we've talked on many occasions about the inability for players to end games in some scenarios, and that is part of the reason why I feel that maybe the attractor nerf is bad, because attractor is used, or just attractor nerfs in general, that attractor is used to close out games more quickly or push them to an end state because both players see where things are going. Blondie kind of does the same thing, because if your opponent sets up a defensive position, you need a way to dive. And things like Blondie, either assisted by Shove Shark and Fantome or not, are both tanky, they are threatening, and they're threatening on multiple fronts. Not only can they push a lot of damage, but they also can power, hypothetically in Blondie's case, power down the entire opposing team. This allows you to push, which is something that you just kind of can't do in Phobies. If you have to run into their concave, aka they have their defenses set up, this game is structured in a way that it is defender's advantage. If I attack into you, I only get one attack, but you get two attacks back. So odds are you're going to wipe the floor with me unless my initial attack was so decisive that the game ended right there. Blondie gives you those initiation tools to either bully your opponent out because they don't want to get hit with Blondie, or if they do allow it to connect, now the Blondie player can dive in and actually make something happen, which I think is pretty cool, whether it's Fantome or Shove Shark related or not. But Blondie here with the buff, I think, is going to see a lot more play. It's already been seeing a lot of play, so I think Blondie received a buff because the upcoming electric Phobies may make melee mechanicals weaker. There is a world in which some of these phobies are getting changed with the dev knowledge of what's coming down the pipeline. We haven't gotten that far yet. But yes, it's a valid point to bring that up, that maybe Blondie is getting buffed because otherwise it just gets completely pushed out. With the addition of the new phobies, it's only going to be, well, they're going to be releasing at the same time, so I was going to say it's going to be a brief time. I guess it still will be a little bit of time between people getting the new phobies and them being thrown at Blondie, unless you're Hoploy, in which case you're going to have everything, and everything's going to be leveled up, and it doesn't matter. I'm fine with the Blondie change. I don't know that it needed it, so we'll have to see if this one is a buff that actually is problematic for the game. Blue is getting a buff. It is going from a debuff of 300 to 325. Sure. We don't see Blue all that often. That's why I always get excited when it shows up, because it's probably the funniest phobia in the entire game. Like, Blue is just absurd. Even among an entire cast of almost by definition absurdities. However, Blue, I don't think 325 hits a break point all of a sudden that makes something zero attack that otherwise wouldn't have been. I'm sure there's like one or two phobies. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but this is fine. Like, okay. Blue got buffed. Can't really complain about that. Especially the fish tank recolor seems to do huge electric damage. Will be a huge problem when it's named Ace. We'll see. We'll see. Everything looks like huge damage. I heard someone say that Blue's debuff is now 50 to 25 less than Oopsie. What? And that one Blue play cost me a game. I've been hating on him. I mean, I like Blue, but it is a very narrow use case scenario phobia. All right, Bluelien getting yet another nerf after the previous nerf. So in the past patch, we got a nerf to Bluelien's cooldown on spa treatment, but we're getting an additional nerf. This time, its health is getting decreased from 1800 to 1600. This is something that people have been asking for a long time. Bluelien is, I mean, especially pre-first nerf, Bluelien is bordering on abusive. It had way more stats than virtually everything else in its range, as well as having an incredible power. Now, here's the thing, as Chad is saying, Bluelien did nothing wrong, hashtag free Bluelien. I'm kind of in that camp. I'm not going to lie. Don't get me wrong. I think the spas were possibly problematic. You were able to keep just such an enormous amount of spas that it's just like, if your opponent wasn't constantly pressuring you and winning via the pressure, then you're immediately going to fall out of, like, the Bluelien player takes over the game, especially if they have any way to poke you. However, I kind of wish that every melee phobie had Bluelien stats. Well, maybe not every melee phobie, but we'll talk about that in a second. I think most melee phobies should have Bluelien level stats. I think in order to fix melee in the game, the bottom line is just like give everything plus 200 health plus 100 attack baseline. I'm obviously exaggerating, and there's going to be more exceptions than just Fantome. But a variety of the melee phobies could just stand to simply have bigger numbers. And Bluelien is a phobie that you were never, like, you didn't feel bad about putting it on the board. Yes, you were probably doing it for spa treatment, so you could avoid a rustle, you could avoid other poison. You could, and by avoid, I mean completely invalidate poison, basically. But you could also use it as a viable combat phobie, because it could go in, it had burrow movement, it does a bunch of damage, and on top of it, it will end up surviving most likely, or at worst, it's a dimensional and it does a bunch of damage on the way in, does a bunch of damage on the way out, and then you're still at an advantage. I think most Phobies, melee Phobies, could stand for something like this because most of the time they don't get used because they go in and get annihilated. It's just the way it works. And I think that whatever penalty is applied or to ranged Phobies is not enough, or whatever buff is applied when we're talking about card economic costing and things. I just don't see how melee is not coming out on the short end of the stick here. But either way, Bluelien's getting another nerf in this particular case. Probably justified. Like, this seems reasonable. I'm not gonna lose any sleep over this one. On the contrary, however, I was going to say I will lose sleep over this, but I'll be honest, I can't even begin to care. Brutewurst is getting its disease effect increased from 350 to 400 disease baseline. I'll be honest, no one cares. This might be the worst change in the whole thing. The problem with Brutewurst is not the disease. It's the fact that it's a one-move phobie that's melee. Now, don't get me wrong. If you just said, hey, tomorrow we're giving Brutewurst 2-move, or range, or both, or others, like, yeah, we gotta think carefully about this. But this thing sucks. It's bad. And Karst put it very well, I think, in the podcast. If you haven't seen that, go check it out on the YouTube. On the YouTube channel. It's unfortunate that the two best Phobies from the most recent patch up until the one that we're talking about, the two best Phobies were recolors. We had some really cool, and like Brutewurst is awesome. And I agree with Chad, it's a funny Phobie. Like, Brutewurst is a hilarious Phobie. I love this Phobie. This is like top 10 Phobies in the game for me. At least from an aesthetics and, Vorthos perspective, whatever. Like, the fun part. Like, not the actual gameplay part. Not that the gameplay isn't fun. Whatever. You get the idea. The point is that Brutewurst is hilarious, but it sucks. And I've talked about on many occasions, that's okay. It's okay for the game to have some Phobies that suck, because this thing, I guarantee you, it will, and this is my other problem with this. So, Cerberus is usually the example for most newer Phobies players that they immediately point to the first time they see it, and they go, that Phobie is broken. You cannot beat that Phobie. It is way too powerful. Now, most experienced players are going to go, that's crazy talk. That Phobie's not even playable. And that is true. However, both statements can be true, and that may sound like crazy talk. Here's why. The reason both statements can be true is because not only is there a skill gap, there's also a collection gap, whether it's stress level or just sheer quantity of Phobies, like breadth of collection. So you have low-level Phobies, and you don't have many, on top of missing the skill. So of course things like Cerberus seem like they're oppressive. Of course things like Brutewurst are gonna seem like it is impossible to beat them. And I wouldn't be surprised, I don't think the devs have ever said this, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are Phobies that are tiered that way. So that, hey, here's your starter Phobies, and obviously some of them are still good, Jar and Gravedigger, some of them are bad, whatever. Some of them you can pick up quickly, like Cassowary, that are lower rarity. Some of them are higher rarity that you want to use. But there are ones like Brutewurst and Cerberus where I think their niche is, aside from, lol, I Fantome this into the middle of your team and blew you up, it's also, it is interesting and powerful, and it is a level up moment as a player. So you're sitting around in horrors or strangers and you're getting your ass whooped by Brutewurst. But then all of a sudden, it dawns on you how to beat this guy. Just use mechanicals and range or boops or what, like insert whatever. It dawns on you, and that is a cool moment as the learning player. The player that was losing that now has learned this lesson, and you can't have that moment without having a bad guy. This is the Elden Ring argument. Now, personally, that game is terrible. but we're not here to talk about that. The point is that a lot of people say that when they play Dark Souls games or Souls-like games, that the feeling of accomplishing the goal, I beat the boss that's been whooping my ass, feels great. It's the same thing here. At least hypothetically. Personally, I think this is calling it a terrible change is, I feel, not appropriate, because it's a terrible change would be like, oh, you buffed attractor. You know, like, you did something that actually broke the game. This is meaningless for maybe not the majority of the player base, but enough of the player base that who cares? It doesn't matter. The issue for me is that this change does nothing to address any of the problems with Brutewurst. Like, of all of the changes in this patch, I want to know what prompted this the most. Like, I want to know why the disease effect was buffed. Like, just why. It honestly baffles me. I have no clue as to why. If somebody can explain this to me, please tell me, because I don't get this at all. Now, again, I want to move on because who cares? This change is irrelevant. I don't think you can just go, oops, which we're going to see with the next change, but oops, let's give Brutewurst 2 movement. That's not going to work. That could be an actual problem. But I don't know what this change is doing. All of the other ones, I at least understand to a degree. Even the bad Sushi one. I don't have any idea what this change is supposed to do. If it had 2,000 disease, would it be a sufficient buff or no? Honestly, I don't even know if that would matter. So in all seriousness, if this had 1,000,000 disease, the only reason that it would be playable is because of Fantome and Shove Shark, which we'll talk about shortly. Like, if Fantome and Shove Shark were never created, and this released with 1,000,000 disease, I guess that gives, what the hell's he called? Paddles. I couldn't think of his name for a second. That gives Paddles some more usage. And I'm obviously hyperbolizing here, but feel free to scream in the comments. But, like, yeah, you could zone people out, but the way the game plays right now, it's like almost every game you run into a Sentinel. Whether it's Repeller, it's Attractor, or it's Innocuous. This thing's just going to get poked down. It'll probably disease 1, maybe 2 things. And then they're going to burn it down. With probably regular phobies that they're going to use anyway. Either by kiting it, or they're just mechanicals and they don't care about the disease. And maybe that's an indictment of the whole mechanicals, like the phobie type system, which we've talked about before, but I don't know. I don't know that there's a level of disease where Brutewurst matters. It's the same kind of thing with, like, bad Sushi. If you were to add a gazillion poison to bad Sushi, does that make it better? I mean, poison is infinitely worse than disease because it can be cured, so by definition it wouldn't be better. But, well, better than Brutewurst, we're saying. It would be better for bad Sushi. It's clearly a better phobie, but that doesn't solve the inherent problems with the phobie. Which, again, Fantome and Shove Shark do exist, so maybe the first few games after the patch is going to be Brutewurst wall-to-wall, and everyone's going to hate the Nathan's hot dog eating contest or something. I don't know. Anyway, let's move on here. Next up, we got the Collector. This was the phobie that I was gifted by the devs back for the patch, and honest to God, I really tried. I got Fantome because I saved up coffee, and you can't see it behind here, but I have almost 37,000 coffee, and I'll have more soon. We will do a pack opening probably this week for the patch. I was able to get Fantome and Shove Shark very quickly. I tried really hard to make the Collector work. It is not good. Or was not good. Well, the current iteration that's above my head is not good. Why? 1 move and melee. Have you noticed a pattern yet with why bad Sushi, Brutewurst, and now Collector are bad? Well, guess what? Collector's getting a buff. It's getting its movement increase from 1 to 2. Now, compared to Brutewurst, where I think it might be problematic if Brutewurst were to get 2 movement, the reason for that is because it's only 6 keys. 8 keys has to compete against a lot of stuff, notably like this guy, right? Now, admittedly, boss got nerfed, and there are other things that above and below that key cost that it's kind of competing with. And then obviously 7 sort of compete with Brutewurst at 6. You know, you get that striation. I think the devs like to experiment with powerful phobies by giving them 1 move. I am generally of the opinion that the devs, both for changes, and obviously they haven't said this, it's just me inferring, but for changes and new phobia ideas, the devs like new phobia ideas like Collector or Will Wuffalo is usually my go-to example, where when they introduce mechanics like this, although we had Dial before this, so this isn't totally new as compared to Will, that there's nothing is unique. The point is when they have these things that's like, ooh, this could be kind of scary, like this could actually be a problem, they play it safe, and I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that the devs are willing to go to these lengths and say, all right, it didn't work out the way we wanted to. We played it safe. I always find it's better. Okay. So here's the thing. It's not better. I prefer is the way to put it. I prefer that they launch a crap phobie, like the Collector, and then buff it. The correct way, industry standard way, would be to release an overpowered phobie and then nerf it. I think we can all put 2 and 2 together as to why, right? Because then people will go bananas and they will buy everything so they can get it. And then they'll be all pissed off when it gets nerfed. But then, I mean, the MOBAs were infamous for doing this in the late 2000s, mid 2000s even. Whereas just whatever the new champion that released, the new hero, the new whatever, they were broken. And they were broken for months until they go, oh, we got to nerf it. And they nerf it just in time to release a new broken thing. It was like a joke. It was like a running gag that nobody thought was hilarious except for the MOBA makers, bankers. They love that. The Phobies devs, and again, I don't know that they're doing this, but they've seemingly taken the opposite approach where they'll launch something as doo-doo, and then they'll fix it afterwards, or at least now we're getting the fixes. So for Collector, I do like this change. I don't think it's going to be as oppressive as a lot of, like, potentially how Brutewurst would be. I think Brutewurst would benefit more than Collector because it's just cheaper. It's easier to squeeze in 6 keys than it is to squeeze in 8. And you have to have your 8 keys do a ton because guess what? You sunk a huge chunk of your resources into this phobie. Now here's the thing. Collector inherently, we talked about this when it was first released, because of oddity, where it removes the actions, it effectively has more health than you see on the card. Like this thing might have 4,000 health because your opponent's attacks, if you look at it this way, think of it as an attack debuff. They now do half damage because they don't get 2 attacks. Now, what would likely happen in a lot of these scenarios is they probably want to kite. They would want to attack and run away, but they certainly can't do that. So it is entirely possible the Collector's going to go in and you can't get him. And with 2 moves, now he can run you down. He is now the monster in every 80s horror flick. Every grindhouse movie. He's the monster. He's just running your ass down. Is it going to work? I don't know. I'm interested to see. Like, I think Collector does have the potential with 2 moves. Because think about like a Shove Shark. Imagine this guy with 3 move. Shove Shark shows up in a ton of games, right? And this, similar to Blondie, gives you that initiation factor where your opponent's clumped. Now the Collector could move 3 with Shove Shark, or get Fantomed in, admittedly. Again, we're getting there. We're almost there, chat. I know everybody wants to talk about it. We're almost there. Admittedly, the newly nerfed Fantome, but still, like, it's going to be difficult to hide from this guy. It's still a melee phobie. But this guy kind of secures kills on things because you're going to go in, they can't run as far away. I'm very curious to see how Collector plays out. I'm actually excited to see people submit replays with Collector. Whereas before it was always like, oh, you put Collector on the board, so were you just handicapping yourself by incinerating 8 keys? Now it's like, where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money? Now his name, the Collector, makes more sense. He'll be collecting people's tears when he oddities swaths of phobies. That is a very difficult sentence to say. I don't know why, but you're absolutely right. Imagine this guy going in and just clobbering your opponent's team with a bunch of paperwork. Like, I am so much more excited about Collector. Like, this is pretty good, and I think that it's reasonable on an 8 key. We've talked about this before, but not recently, that the scale of power for phobies should not be linear. It isn't, and it shouldn't be, and the reason for that is the tempo, the opportunity cost of banking exists, and it should be there. There should be a cost to doing it, but the phobie that you're banking for needs to be able to try and get you over the hump, or otherwise there's never a reason to bank. This is going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to this. We may have a lot of tiers to collect. We'll see. We'll see. All right. I know Karst read these notes and fell out of his chair. Maybe he had to change his pants. I don't know. Karst, I don't think you're going to make it this far in the video, but whenever we do the next podcast, I'll have to ask. And I will ask him explicitly, did you have to change your pants after you saw that the Jackalopes are getting buffed? We are getting buffs to all of the Jackalopes, including the King. Not there yet, but all of the subject, I guess, Jackalopes are getting the same buff. They're going to get an increase on their attack pack bonus and increased health, which I think is important for all of them. I think the health buff for, truthfully, I think a lot of undead could stand for a minor health buff, especially the resurrect phobies. We joke about Droney being the bane of resurrect phobies, and it's going to continue to be. But I think that these phobies were just too anemic. So we have now a health buff coming in. What is it? And again, this is going to be true for Cottontail, Flopsy, and Mopsy, all three. 125 to 150 on the attack pack bonus. Again, we're talking level 1. Clearly, you're seeing a level 9, so the numbers aren't going to line up. This is just for example. And the increased health is from 500 to 600. The health buff is probably more important. I don't know that the 25 damage bonus hits any breakpoints. I don't think it's going to hit anything relevant, is the problem. Hold on, chat. I got a ping in Discord. So actually, I take it back. So I take it back. The buff is going to push them to 425 damage, which means that they can now actually... Or no, they would have gotten it before. Never mind. They would have been at 425. I was going to say now they can kill a jar, but they could have gotten it anyway, because the jar is 420 health. I don't... Again, this feels like a change that is weird to me. In the sense of the numbers. So, clearly, doing more damage is better, right? Galaxy Brain take there. But to me, the biggest and most important damage adjustments or health adjustments are when you suddenly survive a breakpoint if you're getting a health buff, or you are now able to take something down because you got your damage buff. And going to the 450 point doesn't feel like you're doing anything. For ladder play, it's going to be weird because obviously people are it's going to be a crapshoot as to whatever your levels are at. So obviously it is better. I mentioned a while ago that I'd be concerned about potential buffs for these guys because I think it will be overwhelming at low levels because low-level players, again, similar to what we were talking about with the Cerberus and Brutewurst discussion, probably are not going to have the skills and or the tools to address just getting rushed down by jackalopes. Now, the level up moment is probably worth it of, hey, you're getting your butt kicked by jackalopes. Figure it out. Whether somebody coaches you along or you figure it out on your own, either way, like you get past that hurdle and you become a better player. Will it be viable at higher levels? I hope it is, but I am a little concerned about it, like the resurrect thing just being super obnoxious. I don't know how viable it's truly going to be. Like, if you go going first, if you go turn 1 jackalope, your opponent's probably very happy, right? If you go turn 1 going second, 2 jackalopes, is your opponent happy? You could represent like 900 damage at level 1 again. So you do Jackalope 1, Jackalope 2, get them into position, Jackalope King collapse on whatever they expose. You could kill some stuff, but that's still not a ton of damage. Like, I'm not sure you kill very many things, even on level, because remember, you have to move in and then attack, so you essentially only get 2 attacks. 900 damage deals with a bunch of stuff, but not everything. I still think they need a little bit of help, is the bottom line. I still think they need a little bit of help, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I like how jar is a standard measurement at this point. Yeah, I mean, there's a few phobies that are pretty standard. There's a few phobies that are pretty standard that give people some good context. All right, chat, we finally got here. There's more changes, of course, but this is the one that everybody presumably wanted to yap about, and that is Fantome. As you can see up there, Transposer teleports from 3 range. Teleports from 3 range, and it is now going down to Dose. We got 2 range. Now, this is not... I don't think this makes anybody happy. The Fantome users obviously don't want Fantome nerfed, but I don't think that this is the nerf that most people wanted. It is and it isn't. So it does address some of the Vault Snipe. And by Vault Snipe, for anybody who's unsure, I don't know how you're unsure. But I think that it doesn't address Vault Sniping, which is pulling, you pop out a phobie, you teleport it with Fantome, and then it's immediately in the fight way faster than you otherwise would have been able to anticipate. Like, it is almost unstoppable because of the range that it provides. This directly addresses that by shrinking said range. I think what most people wanted to see was the inability to pull something from the vault full stop. Like, you just couldn't do it. Or some variation thereof. We saw talk about, oh, we'll reset cooldowns or warm-ups or whatever on things that come out of the vault. Or that the teleport just resets those things. This does address some of the problem. So I have to say that. It does address some of the problem. But at the end of the day, we are still going to have the problem of something that is completely safe. And I'm going to use Kaboom as the example here because it is the most direct, the most obvious, And one of the more illustrative examples that we could probably come up with, but you could insert Collector or Brutewurst for all I care. It doesn't matter. That Kaboom is completely safe because it is all the way back in Cleveland. And then you're going to teleport its ass all the way up and just drop it into your opponent's lap. Express delivery. Here's your explosive sandwich. It's like a Looney Tunes cartoon. And yes, the range is now different. It is worse. It is still able to do it safely. So this is one of those changes where you will lose games you would have otherwise won if Fantome was in its current state, as opposed to the post-nerf state. However, I don't know if this is necessarily going to appease people enough, the ones who are complaining about Fantome. Now, I will say that for Monster of the Week for the tournaments, Fantome has not been putting up crazy numbers. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Fantome had terrible numbers, like was showing as a phobie that needed to be buffed by the devs' metrics. However, there is, I've always been of the opinion, balance around the best players in the game, and we've seen the best players do some really heinous things with Fantome. It also manipulates the gameplay pattern in a negative way, because your opponent, just like old Cupcake, pre-nerf Cupcake, you had to presume your opponent had Cupcake, and if you did, the best play is to not play. You need to hang all the way back, completely out of range, because if your opponent popped Cupcake, you just die. As soon as they put anything remotely threatening on the board, and there was the risk that Cupcake could come out and buff that threatening thing and wipe your team, or heavily down, like cripple you, you couldn't risk that, so you back up. It's the same thing with Fantome. The range is different now, but the range is the same as Cupcake was, if that makes sense. Cupcake only had a 2 move. This is now a teleport of 2 range. I don't know. I'm not super pleased with this change, but I will say I am willing to give it a chance because I don't know exactly how this is going to play out. It is possible that this is an Akira change where the phobia is still incredibly powerful, but it is no longer oppressive. It is also possible that this is a beauty change. We're talking year 1 of the game. And it's going to need multiple iterations of changes before we get it into a truly healthy state. So, again, similar to other changes that we said earlier, I'm hoping the devs just keep an eye on it and we'll see how it plays out. Personally, I'm torn. I think that, like the handful of games I played against Fantome would have 100% gone in my favor if it was in the post-nerf state. But I don't know if this is, like I said, not to beat a dead horse, but I don't know if this is making anybody happy. We'll have to see. So I don't exist? Why? What am I planning on doing after all the yapping? Sleeping. I don't know. We'll see. I told you earlier, it's probably either Star Wars or Battlegrounds. Just because I need to do some work on Star Wars, and Battlegrounds are less intellectually demanding. I'm happy, and you'll see why if you see my game. I'm a Fantome player that wanted to get a nerf. Fair. So in back-to-back patches, we get Fleshcrawler buffs. We're increasing the health from 2,000 to 2,300, and we're increasing the damage from 450 to 500. Gotta get both thumbs in. Oh, turn this way. Who's got 2 thumbs and is happy with this change? This guy. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if this is good enough. I saw somebody mention offline that, like, oh, this is now comparable to Motherload. Like, obviously, they were always comparable. It's just that it would be unfavorable towards Fleshcrawler. But I don't think that... I think you still take Motherload in, like, every situation. Like, I think Motherload is still going to be better. because of the range. The melee penalty is huge. However, this does bring it much closer, and there is a world where Fleshcrawler is reasonable now. 500 damage is a good amount. Really, 400 and above is where it's like, okay, this is sit up and take notice damage. You look at Klepto, you look at Hematic Ginsting, you look at Phobies along those lines as compared to regular Ginsting, which is still very versatile, but on the lower end of damage. Or Stabby, who has only 375 at level 1. There are these breakpoints. I mean, I guess 400 isn't necessarily a breakpoint. It can be, but 400 is where you start looking at it and you're like, okay, this is a sizable amount of damage. This is now 100 damage more than that. And because it's undead and it has this big AoE as well as this big amount of HP, there is a reality where you go in with Fleshcrawler, slap something, or lick it, I guess. This is weird, but he licks things. That's what they do in Phobie Land to say hello, I guess. So he licks something for 500 damage. They try and kill it, but can't. So now they have this weird dilemma where it's, I stay in and I'm going to get blown out by Raising Hell. Or I have to run and I only get some damage and then you still get to Raising Hell to some degree. Like, I'm excited to see more Fleshcrawler plays because it's a cool animation. It's a fun Phobie that I think Fleshcrawler was one of the ones for me that fell off the face of the earth almost as soon as I unlocked it. It's like, this is not good. Which is, again, this is more of a general thing. I'm very interested and I would love to know how certain things are costed. So in every game, well, maybe not literally every game. I'm coming at this from a card gaming background. And obviously there are cards in Phobies, but it's not quite the same. But the idea is, if you are solving for cost, you want to have, okay, X amount of attack plus Y amount of health plus Z amount of movement / range, and then plus for every positive ability, minus for every negative ability. So like if there's a penalty on it for some way, we're balancing, whatever. We don't really have that in Phobies, but it comes up in card games, obviously, where it's like you pay life or you have to discard cards or you have to kill one of your guys or something like that. The point is, and there are some examples of that in Phobies, but anyway. The point is that you combine, you figure out for all that stuff, and then that gives you how much the Phobie should cost. And you could do it the other way too, where it's like, we need a 3-cost flyer, we need a 5-cost burrow guy, we need a mechanical at this cost, we need an undead at that cost, and okay, well, these are the stats that we can allocate to it, and we want it to be an offensive Phobie, so we'll give it more here, but that means it takes a health hit or whatever. I'd love to know what some of the numbers are, because some of these Phobies, I mean, we're obviously getting buffs to the original cast. Things have changed since then, so that isn't to say that the formula was wrong at the time. But I think even at the time, things like Fleshcrawler and the Jackalopes and some of these other Phobies were just crap. So it's interesting to see them getting changed now, and what does that formula look like now? I don't know. We got more Jackalope changes. We don't care about that. Hoovie. So I'm going to pull this down temporarily. So Hoovie here is getting a buff. You're going to have to commit this to memory. If I remember in editing, I'll put it over on the side there like I had the other ones. I don't own Hoovie, so this is why when you look at the album screen, it puts it in the center instead of the side. But Hoovie's getting a buff, and I believe it is getting a buff of 100 damage. I don't know. We saw one Hoovie game where it won recently in a viewer game. I think Potentia. I mean, maybe it was Monster of the Week. Yeah, Hoovie's going from 500 to 600 attack. And, like, I mean, again, it's a melee Phobie, so hooray, it's getting a buff. I like the idea of Hoovie. I think it needs to go further in on its idea of I am a heart rush phobie. It should encourage you to say, I'm going to forego the panic points. I'm going to forego board advantage. I'm beelining for the heart, and I'm going to pin Hoovy on the heart and the rest of my team, and I'm going to race you. And we'll see who's faster. Either your defense or your offense versus my offense. And I don't know that Hoovy's in a state that it can do it. But I mean, healing 600 damage a turn off the heart? I don't know. We'll see. I can see a world in which Hoovy's very, very toxic, so buffing it too much could be problematic, but we'll see. I don't really have a whole lot to add about Hoovy. All right, Jackalope King. This is also getting a buff. The reason I call this out as compared to Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail is because it does get different stats. Attack pack bonus going from 125 to 200 instead of 150, and it's increased health from 800 to 1,000. This guy probably was, out of all of them, in the most need of the health buff. I could honestly see it going even, once again, even higher. Same with the attack buff. All the things I said about the Jackalopes before apply, except here, the difference is that this guy's probably going to be the surprise jump scare. So you get Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, they're out there, they're doing their thing, maybe they start to collapse on something, you have 3 keys, bam, hit them with the Jackalope King, and then drop the hammer. Hypothetically. But the big thing is that I still think there needs to be a Jackalope Queen that gives them another buff. I think they could probably use Jackalope Queen being like they all get +1 movement, and then I don't know. I'd like to see something interact with the Resurrect where like they have to be stepped on twice, but I don't know how that would work. Extra movement, and then probably they'll just get extra stats, but I think they could still stand to have a little bit of a buff, but as I said, I'd be concerned about Jackalope builds suddenly running amok early game. We'll see. Sticking with the 3 keys, we got Microscopic. Increase health from 900 to 950. I can't even begin to care about this. Microscopic sees virtually no play simply because Gesundheit exists. Gesundheit does everything Microscopic does, but cheaper. Yes, Microscopic is a little bit tankier. Yes, Microscopic does a little bit more damage. But for the most part, the only time either of these phobies are getting used is when your opponent has encroached too close to you, and therefore you often want to just simply pop out the Gesundheit, hit them twice, and use the keys for something else. So that way you can just, swarm whatever their offense is because they overextended. And therefore the extra key is more valuable than the, like, middling extra, like it's 100 extra damage, which is a big deal. But the question is 1,200 significantly better than 1,000? And for the most part, it's not. The reason being is because either you're killing the thing in 2 hits, so both of them do that equally, or you're going to need a 3rd hit from something else, in which case you're probably going to need a 3rd hit for either of them. You're not changing a lot of the scenarios. And the extra 50 health I don't think matters. I'd like to see more differentiation between them, but they're both clearly supposed to be, we are small, like cheap, flying glass cannons. And that's fine, but if you already have a cheap flying glass cannon, a slightly more expensive glass cannon is almost always going to be overshadowed unless it hits a particular breakpoint. And I don't know if it would be healthy to have Microscopic do 700 damage at level 1 or something like that. And it can't really be a glass cannon if you're giving it a ton of health. But it is notable that it almost has more health than, like, a ton of other stuff. Maybe not a ton. But, like, the Jackalopes, for example, The Jackalopes, for example, have 500 base health. This thing has almost double. Granted, they have Resurrect. I don't know. The comparisons get weird. I don't care about Microscopic. This thing never sees play, and I don't think this is going to change it. Minotaur. Increased health from 900 to 9... Oh, wrong thing. I was going to say, there's no way it has 900 health. From 1,400 health to 1,500 health. This is like the third round of buffs for Minotaur. I'm not sure why the devs are pushing it so much, but it is a melee phobie. I like Minotaur. In general, like, I think this is a reasonable phobie. And the only thing I don't like about this, and I did mention earlier about when we were talking about Bluelien that, hey, I want to see the melee phobies just like push their numbers. Push their numbers until we're concerned about melee getting pushed too far. The problem I have with this is that it could be problematic for the Jackalopes. And the reason being is they are clearly a swarm-based strategy that is melee. So you're going to be able to just walk Minotaur up, kill multiple Jackalopes, and the Jackalope player just cries. Which is kind of funny. And I wonder if that's the justification for Minotaur getting another buff, because it's like, oh, well, we need to have a common answer to be able to give those lower level players an answer to Jackalopes. But either way, like, I do like Minotaur. I think it's cool. I'm glad it's getting buffed. We'll just have to see where it plays out, or how it plays out. All right, last few changes, chat. We don't need to talk about Mopsy, same thing. Let's talk about Shrek. Ogre is getting buffed from 1,700 health to 2,000 health. That's a 300 health increase for you mathematicians out there. I don't care. I will, okay, I kind of care. Because Ogre sometimes does come out, and it's just like, man, this guy is too fragile. Like, he clearly hits like a truck, but you need him to stick around. You can't send him out there, get him for one attack, and then be like, oh, well, I incinerated my 7 keys. I still think you're incinerating your 7 keys because they probably would have been put to better use earlier in the game so that you didn't get into this situation. And I think that the entire idea of the comeback mechanic is on paper really cool and interesting, and everybody, just about everybody out there is like, oh yeah, more comeback mechanics, that sounds fun. And inevitably they always end up super toxic in games where it causes either long drawn out games. It's like, oh, you're about to lose, but then you have to launch this immense comeback, which feels great once, and if you're on the other side, it almost feels like there's no way. Like, if they're good enough to be able to launch a massive counterattack and take over the game, it feels hopeless as the other player because it's, I did everything and I still can't win. It doesn't matter what I do because then the comeback mechanic kicks in. It's like playing Mario Kart. How many times it's like you're crushing everyone because you are better at racing games than they are. And then you just get blue shelled into oblivion. So now the skills required change into something that feels weird of you actually want to be in like 3rd or 4th place so that you can ensure you're getting red shells and the boosts that you want while never getting targeted with the blue shells. And then you just win at the end. What's the equivalent to the blue shell in Phobies? I don't know. But the comeback mechanic and the rubber banding inherent to Mario Kart is super frustrating, and it is in other games as well. It is easy to fall into that trap from a design perspective of, well, you got to have a comeback mechanic so people don't, they don't get frustrated and they don't just lose all the time. It's like, you know how you don't lose all the time? Stop sucking. Win more. That's how you don't lose all the time. You win. And that it sounds dumb, but the reality is that you end up with, it is entirely possible to end up with more toxic game states by having too strong of a comeback mechanic, because then none of the winning efforts matter. The most winning effort is to lose. which is completely counterintuitive and is very frustrating. So, all that to say that this is probably good for the purpose of making Ogre more feasible. I don't expect we're going to see a ton more Ogre, but 300 health is a lot. That's a significant amount. We said it was a lot for Fleshcrawler, so it's got to be a lot here. Although this is going up to Fleshcrawler's old HP total. I ship Ogre and Hoovy. That's a toxic relationship if I ever heard one. That is a toxic relationship if I ever heard one. We have another Russell buff, chat. I, honest to God, have no idea why. Russell! I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. Honest to God, I don't know why this one happened. It increased health from 1600 to 1700, increased damage from 5 to 6. So this might be one of the exceptions that I was talking about earlier. I'm not 100% sure, but it might be one of the exceptions that I was referencing earlier when it comes to melee phobies. I don't know that Russell actually needs a buff because Russell is there almost exclusively for the caw. You are putting Russell on the board to poison your opponent's team. Everything else is just a bonus. Now, I think that the caw is dangerous, and I would rather them buff Russell in this fashion than buff the caw. Thankfully, we haven't seen too much of a problem with the changes from the last round where Russell got, like, the caw actually got buffed. But here, I think there is, I don't know. Russell is now more effective. It's interesting that we're getting these totals. Like, now Russell has been buffed to the old Ogre health, the current Ogre health, which is kind of funny when you think about it. The buff to the damage is actually kind of cool. He is dimensional, so that means that more damage is getting put out. I can't really be upset about Russell buffs, but I honestly didn't think he needed it. I don't think he needed it. But we may be entering a new era of Phobies changes, which maybe we'll talk about in a minute. So next up is Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim also got a buff, increased damage from 500 to 525. Of all of the changes, this is one of them. Of all the changes in this patch, the buff for Tiny Tim is absolutely one of those changes. I don't have the foggiest idea what this is supposed to do. It doesn't matter. I mean, again, it matters. It's clearly better. Tiny Tim is more dangerous than it was before. But virtually no one, first of all, I don't think I've ever seen a Tiny Tim win. Second of all, they weren't losing because he couldn't attack, like, it wasn't because he wasn't doing enough damage. It was because he couldn't attack at all or you incinerated 6 keys. Should he have got more health? I don't know if he can. You could just give him, like, a 50 health buff, for example, is technically a 100 health buff because of Peekaboo. I almost said Pikachu, but because of Peekaboo. His role is to be the damage sponge. But your opponent naturally is just going to walk away from him. I don't know. This doesn't feel like it does anything. It probably doesn't hurt. Like, okay, give him a little bit more damage. It's not going to hurt anybody because he's still not attacking. And if he is, he's just going to immediately get annihilated. I don't know. This is another in the I don't care bucket. All right, fine. He gets buffed. Great. Last change, chat. Zappy. Zappy gets a buff. The counter attack damage, or excuse me, the electricity effect from 300 to 350 baseline. This could be another change that's in prep for the new Phobies. I don't know. I guess Zappy's underutilized. I think most people use Erratic if they want an anti-mech. He's literally already the best mechanical phobie. Not on this planet. Not on Phobieland either, I don't think. Does anti? I don't think that's true either. I mean, aside from the fact that Frosty exists, erratic is better, I think. Erratic is generally better because it influences your opponent's positioning more. To be honest, I almost never see Zappy, except when I put him on the board and I don't get to use him that much. Ray Chargels comes out way more often. Sparky comes out way... Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think Sparky is better than Zappy. But I see Sparky 10 times more than I see Zappy. I probably shouldn't. I also see Bloat more than... Like, virtually, honest to God, I've seen more Thunder Rocks than Zappy. Now, this could just be a rarity thing, or people not having it up to appropriate levels. I don't have a problem with Zappy getting buffed. It's kind of annoying that the anti-mech is a mech. I mean, it's fine. Feels weird for, like, silly reasons. But this guy's fine, I guess. I think this change is fine. Are we going to see a giant uptick in Zappy? I don't think so. It's just going to be better at the job that it was doing. However, I think the biggest thing that you can say for it is that mechs probably needed the nerf. Like, I think that's fair to say, right? Because otherwise, we've had a lot of problems with mechs. So, Zappy being improved in this fashion, attractor nerf maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Chat, that's the whole patch. We're going to talk about the trailer momentarily. We're going to do some breakdowns on it. Overall, I like the patch. There's some stuff that is baffling to me, honestly. Like, I legitimately don't understand what the goal is. There are other ones that I understand what was done, but I kind of disagree with. There are other ones that I really like. I'm interested, as always, to hear the team's thoughts if they're going to volunteer them, as well as I want to know what the cadence for these changes are. So we got one balance patch for the anniversary update. We're getting a balance patch for this one. Are we only getting balance patches each season, aka whenever we get a major patch? I think that's reasonable, unless there's something that's just like, okay, Shove Shark had to be hotfixed because it was a problem. I think it's a reasonable amount of time to let people get the Phobie, let people play around with the Phobie, get it leveled up, try a bunch of different scenarios, introduce new maps, that sort of thing. There's a lot of wrinkles whenever a new update drops for Phobie, so I think it is reasonable to have that cadence if that's what they're going to try and maintain. And I think if they announce that that is the goal, I think that will keep people placated, because at least they have something then to look for. It's like, oh, well, I don't like how the meta's doing right now. I don't like how this is. It's one thing to say, hey, here's all these new toys, come back. There are a number of people that are going to go, yes, that looks great, but the thing I hated is still there. And it's not likely to change. If you at least present the idea that the balance patches are coming alongside, or potentially coming alongside at least, every new major content release, it gives people the opportunity to be like, all right, I'm going to check it, because things got shaken up so much. You get new stuff coming in, you get other stuff getting modified, you get new maps, tons of stuff is happening. So there's a lot of cool stuff that could be going on. But like I said, we're going to take a look at the trailer next. That's going to do it for this one. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Tune in next time for more Random's Thoughts.